Hey guys, tonight we're diving face first into the dirt and staying there because you, my friend, were born a medieval peasant. No sword, no crown, no flowing robes, just cracked hands, drafty huts, and a future that smells distinctly of compost and goat. This isn't the glamorous medieval life with feasts and jousts. No, this is mud-caked reality. If you're lucky, you'll live long enough to sprout gray hair. If not, well, at least you'll be buried close to your shovel. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're born in a cottage that could generously be described as wood adjacent. The walls are woven branches covered in clay, dung, and prayer. The roof leaks. The floor is just dirt with feelings, and there's a strong chance a chicken witnessed your birth. Your mother names you after a saint, not because she's especially pious, but because there's a 1 in 3 chance you'll need divine intervention by your first birthday. You're swaddled in scratchy wool and immediately placed near the fire, not for warmth, but so the rats don't get curious. Your family doesn't celebrate your birth with a feast. They nod, maybe mutter something about another mouth to feed, and get back to plucking weeds from the beet patch. The midwife gets paid with turnips. The priest might show up if he's sober to sprinkle some water on you and claim your soul. Historians still argue whether peasant families genuinely celebrated births with joy or just treated it as part of the general farm inventory cycle. Evidence points to both. Love existed, but so did the grim math of survival. By the time you can walk, you're crawling around in muck that's mostly mud, partly manure, and occasionally frog. Shoes? What shoes? You have calluses and something that might be a sock, but could also be a chewed rag. You sleep in the corner of the family hut, sandwiched between your siblings, your grandmother, and at least one goat. Privacy doesn't exist. If you fart, 7 people know. The window is just a hole with a rag. The door creaks like it's mourning something, and the air inside smells like cabbage, feet, and possibly regret. Outside, the village is awake. Carts creak, chickens scream, children run wild with sticks and purpose. You toddle out and immediately step on a thistle. You don't cry. Crying is reserved for death or soup with no salt. You're fed mashed roots, porridge, and occasionally a chunk of meat so mysterious your parents won't look it in the eye. You don't complain. You chew. You swallow. You learn. By age 6, you're helping in the fields. By age 8, you're trusted to not drop the firewood. By age 10, you're expected to be useful, grateful, and quiet. Quirky side note, in some villages, it was believed that if a child was too loud at night, fairies might steal their voice. You once hoped for that, just so your older brother would shut up. Your dreams? Not of castles or dragons. No, you dream of bread with butter, of boots without holes, of a day without scratching something you'd rather not talk about. You're not stupid. You notice things, like how the reeve always has better shoes, or how the priest gets the best wine, or how your father stares too long at the grain pile after harvest, calculating what's left after the Lord, the church, and the mice take their cut. You ask once, why do we always give so much away? Your father says, because we were born here. You don't ask again. And so, your life begins in mud, with turnips, and the faint hope that, just maybe, this year's harvest won't kill you. Your house, if you dare call it that, isn't really a house. It's more like a glorified livestock shed that someone accidentally decided to raise a family in. One room, no chimney, one door that groans with every gust of wind like it's begging to be released from its hinges. The walls bulge slightly, not from craftsmanship, but from age and the warping effect of too many damp winters. You wake up to the sound of a chicken laying an egg beneath your sleeping mat. Again, the chicken lives here too. So do the goats, and the dog. Not a noble hunting hound, but a three-legged mutt named something like Stick or Bread. The dog sleeps by the hearth. You and your siblings sleep wherever there's space between hooves, elbows, and regret. Privacy? What's that? You've seen every member of your family sneeze, scratch, snore, and sob. You know your father's nighttime cough better than your own thoughts. You've stepped in things you wish you hadn't. You've heard things you definitely wish you hadn't. The central fire pit smolders faintly in the middle of the room, choking the air with smoke that never seems to escape. There's no chimney, just a hole in the thatch. When it rains, the smoke becomes steam. Your eyes sting every morning, not from tears, just from living. Historians still debate whether peasants were used to this lifestyle or simply resigned to it. Some argue they found comfort in the closeness. Others suggest they silently counted the ways they might escape, if only in their sleep. You step outside to relieve yourself, because of course, there's no privy. Just the spot by the hedge and some deeply unhelpful leaves. It's cold, damp. Your breath clouds in the air. Your boots are just leather sacks with twine. You tiptoe around last night's goat droppings with the grace of someone who's learned to navigate betrayal in the dark. Breakfast? If you're lucky, porridge. More likely, yesterday's porridge. Cold, stiff, sliced into edible squares like some sort of medieval tofu. You eat in silence, not out of reverence, just because everyone's still chewing. You glance around the room. Your mother is already churning something in a clay pot, arms moving with muscle earned through misery. Your eldest brother is oiling a harness with a rag that looks suspiciously like your missing sock. Your youngest sister is talking to a stick. You envy the stick. Quirky side note: some peasants believed sticks had spirits. A talking stick could protect you from nightmares. Others just used it to avoid feeling lonely. Your sister, clearly, subscribes to both schools of thought. There are no rooms in your house, just zones. Sleeping corner, drying corner, goat corner, all-purpose corner. You sometimes crawl behind the firewood pile for alone time. It smells like moss and secrets. At night, you all sleep together. Not for warmth. Though, yes, that too. But because it's the only way to avoid getting stepped on by livestock. Or worse, your uncle visiting from the next village who snores like a church bell stuffed with bees. And when someone gets sick, there's no isolation. Just a slow spreading of coughs, chills, and pox. When your little brother got the fever last year, you all took turns sweating beside him. Because that's what family does. Suffers together. You once asked your mother why the manor house has 3 rooms. She said, "Because they don't need 4. You didn't understand then. You do now. You grow up learning to move through your home sideways, ducking under beams, tiptoeing over snoring limbs. You learn to dress in layers not for fashion, but because the only thing worse than being cold is being more cold. Sometimes the wind howls through the slats and you lie awake, counting the holes in the roof like stars. Sometimes you dream of a house with stairs. Sometimes you just dream of not waking up with a chicken staring you dead in the eye. You wake at dawn, not because you want to, but because life insists. The rooster crows, the dog farts, and someone's elbow is firmly lodged in your ribs. You untangle yourself from the communal pile of limbs, wool, and misplaced goat, and groan as you stretch. Your back sounds like a pile of twigs breaking under a boot. You step outside into a thick layer of dew. Cold air hits your lungs like a slap. Your first breath is fresh. Your second smells like the compost heap behind the house. So begins another glorious day in the life of a peasant. There's no to-do list. There's everything that needs doing before the sun goes down or someone dies. The oxen need feeding. The field needs plowing. Firewood, water, fence mending, hay stacking, pig wrangling. And that's just before breakfast. You grab a wooden hoe with a handle so splintered it qualifies as a weapon. The field waits. It's mostly mud. Some parts are more enthusiastic mud. You drag the plow behind you like a penance, sinking ankle deep with every step. The wind howls like it's trying to tell you something, probably run. You bend, pull, stab, twist, repeat, again and again and again. Your hands develop their own kind of wisdom, where to grip, when to pause, how to lean your weight just enough to avoid snapping your spine in half. Your back, however, learns nothing. It screams constantly. The sun climbs higher. Your brow drips. You can feel your socks turning to soup. And then you stop, briefly, just to rest your eyes on the horizon. You see the manor house in the distance. Stone walls, glazed windows, maybe even a chair. You consider charging it with a pitchfork. Then you remember lunch. Your spouse or eldest child brings it out wrapped in a cloth. You sit on a rock, inhale deeply, and unwrap. A hunk of barley bread and some onions. Excitement is not on the menu. You chew slowly, jaw grinding like a millstone. A bee buzzes nearby. You debate letting it sting you just so you have an excuse to stop working. You know there's no excuse. After lunch, it's back to labor. You fix the fence, gather eggs, re-stuff the hay that fell from the roof overnight. You twist your ankle in a rabbit hole, but keep walking. There's no such thing as a day off. Rest is something for nobles, monks, and people who are dead. Historians still argue whether peasants were as downtrodden as the stereotypes suggest. Some sources suggest festivals, community, and laughter amid hardship. But even the most generous records agree. The work was constant, the body was expendable, and breaks were rare enough to feel like miracles. Your neighbor stops by, sweating just as much. "You heard about Henry?" he asks. You shake your head. "Fell into the dung pit. Gone." You blink. "Gone like..." He shrugs. "They pulled him out. But he's different now." You both nod, not in horror, just recognition. Because any day, any mundane, manure-splattered task might be the one that gets you. You once knew a woman who choked on a beet. They still joke about it, but carefully, because it could be you next. By evening, your fingers feel like someone else's. Your knees ache with the fatigue of 10 generations. You stink. The pigs avoid you now. You trudge home, step over a puddle of something mysterious, and collapse inside. Dinner is the same as lunch, with fewer onions. You say a brief prayer, not because you're especially devout, but because if you don't, the priest might ask why, and then you'll owe another tithe, possibly a confession. You fall into the straw pile, too tired to scratch the flea bite on your ankle. Tomorrow will be exactly like today. and the day after that, and the day after that, until it isn't. Until you drop dead in the field and someone else digs turnips over your bones. It's a holy day. You know this not because of any divine revelation, but because the church bell rang at dawn. Your plow remains untouched, and everyone's wandering around like they're trying to remember what they're not supposed to do today. Another feast day. You put on your least moldy tunic. It still smells like damp wool and barnyard tension, but it's technically your good one because the sleeves match. You trudge toward the chapel with your family in tow. Your youngest is chewing on a stick. Your spouse is muttering about the pigs escaping again. And you're thinking about all the things you can't do today. Because feast days, they're a trap. Yes, it's a day off from toil, but with asterisks. You're not allowed to work the fields. You're not allowed to spin or grind grain or even clean the house, because labor on a holy day is a sin. But you're also not allowed to skip Mass or eat meat, unless it's one of those feast days, or nap too long, or enjoy anything with even a whiff of indulgence. It's like a day made of rules, wrapped in incense. Historians still argue whether peasants welcomed feast days as blessed breaks or resented them for the strict expectations and food limitations. Some treat them like holidays, others like hunger with hymns. You file into the stone chapel shivering. It's cold, always cold. The priest drones in Latin. You understand none of it except the part where he makes eye contact and pauses until you remember to bow. The candle wax drips onto the floor. The bench pinches your thighs. You shift. Your neighbor smells like turnips. The baby 2 rows up is actively screaming into the void. The altar boy drops the incense burner. No one reacts. Finally, the Mass ends. You shuffle outside. Time for the feast. In this case, a communal pot of pottage, barley, water, the memory of a carrot, and if you're lucky, a few slices of salted pork. If not, cabbage stew so thin it might technically be soup air. Everyone lines up. You share wooden bowls. You use the same spoon you've had since last winter. You avoid eye contact with the baker's daughter because of a thing that happened behind the grain silo last fall. The wind picks up. Someone starts singing. Off-key. It's a hymn, but sounds like a death chant. The children chase chickens. One falls into the firewood pile. Everyone laughs. Briefly. Feast days aren't feasts for you. They're logistics. Who brought what? How long it'll last? Whether the barley was properly soaked? And who's going to get blamed if old Bruna's stomach acts up again? You once dreamed of roast goose, honey cakes, ale so strong it could stun a bishop. Instead, you get turnip surprise. The surprise is that it's mostly not turnip. Quirky peasant tradition? Some villages used to bury bones from past feasts to bless the new ones. Others made little edible statues of saints. Yours? You tie 3 onions together and declare it the Trinity. Midday drags on. You play a game with the children, something involving a stick, a stone, and yelling. No one knows the rules, but someone always ends up crying, so you declare it a tie. Then the priest returns. He blesses the food again. You nod again. He reminds everyone to fast tomorrow. Your stomach rebels preemptively. As the sun sets, the singing returns. Louder now. A little drunker. Someone pulls out a pipe. Someone else has a drum made from a goat bladder stretched over a barrel. You sit beside your spouse and try not to think about the work waiting tomorrow. The fields don't care about saints. The cows don't recognize feast days. And your back doesn't know how to stop hurting. just because the priest says it's Thursday and holy. Still, for one evening, you laugh. Softly, briefly. Someone tells a joke about the Reeves' missing boot. You smile. Someone else makes a pig dance on its hind legs. You chuckle. And for a moment, the weight of the world lifts just enough to feel your ribs expand. Then it starts to rain. Everyone groans. The fire sputters. The stew pot tips. You walk home soaked, clutching a stale crust, dodging puddles and livestock with your feet and your soul. And tomorrow, you'll dig again. You'd think after a holy day, they'd let you rest. Nope. You wake up to someone pounding on the door. It's the Reeve. Again. He's not here to check on your soul or your sore back. He wants taxes, or tithes, or fines for something you don't remember doing. Maybe your chickens wandered too far. Maybe you breathed near the wrong fence. You squint at him through the foggy dawn. He's got that smug expression that says, I can't read, but I do have authority. He holds out his hand. The Lord requests a bushel of barley. You blink. We gave that last week. He shrugs. Then he'll take wheat. We don't have wheat. Then a goat. You hesitate. He leans closer. Then we'll take your name to the scribe. You go and get the goat. The kids cry. The goat cries. You don't. You're too tired. Welcome to the tax system. Vague, persistent, and stacked entirely against you. You owe grain to the Lord, eggs to the Reeve, wool to the bailiff, 1/10 of everything to the church, and if you don't give it, they take it. Historians estimate that peasants often gave up to half their harvest in dues, tithes, and random charges. And that's if they had a harvest. Sometimes the field yielded nothing but weeds and broken dreams. You still paid. You once tried asking what would happen if you refused. They said, then you'll sleep in the stocks. You asked what happened after that. They said, the rats find you. You didn't ask again. Later that day, the priest stops by. He wants a chicken. You don't have a chicken. You have one half-grown rooster who may or may not be cursed. He bites. He screams. He has stared unblinking at thunder. The priest takes him anyway. You wonder how long that'll last. You finish your chores with a familiar hollow in your chest. You dug the earth. You fetched the water. You fixed the fence. You gave away your goat. You lost your future eggs. But hey, you're still breathing. For now. Quirky side detail. Some peasants kept a tax chicken that was too old to lay but too mean to cook. They gave it every year out of spite. One village had a chicken named Bishop that lived to age 11 and bit anyone in robes. You wish you had a bishop. Instead, you have an ache in your spine, mud in your boots, and 3 coins rattling in a pouch that needs 6. Your spouse mutters about brewing nettle tea and selling it to the friar. You nod, even though you know the friar drinks for free. You once tried hiding a sack of apples in the compost heap. The Reeve found them, said it was tampering with divine order. Took the apples and fined you 2 sacks of hay for the insult. You now refer to that spot as St. Rotten's Shrine. That evening, you sit by the hearth and count your debts. You lost track after second goat and assorted onions. Your neighbor Oswin stops by with a bottle of something that might be mead, might be vinegar. You both drink it anyway. Remember when you had shoes? He says. Not really. You laugh. You cry a little, but quietly. Oswin is already asleep. You pull the straw over your legs and whisper a short prayer to Saint Don't Let Them Notice Me. Tomorrow's another tax day. You can feel it, because they always notice. Your body is not a temple. It is a medieval ruin held together by willpower, bad soup, and a thin smear of goose fat on your knees. You wake up with a crick in your neck, a pain in your hip, and a sore spot on your left foot that might be a blister, a bone sprouting through, or just the ghost of bad luck past. You stretch, if you can call it that, and half of your joints creak like old barn doors swinging in a storm. Welcome to peasant physiology. You've never heard the term ergonomics, but if someone invented it, you'd weep into your turnip. You spend most of your days bent, squatting, lifting, twisting, and hauling. There is no neutral spine. There is only the position that hurts least. Your hands are tools now, cracked, blistered, calloused into what some would call strength, but what you know is just built-up scar tissue. Your fingernails are always black, not from paint or ink, but from the dirt that's taken up permanent residence beneath them. You once tried to clean them with a twig. The twig broke. You wash your face in a basin of water, cold enough to crack teeth. Your teeth, by the way, are fewer than they used to be. One came out last week after you bit a particularly enthusiastic piece of crust. You saved it. You don't know why. Historians still debate whether medieval peasants had better or worse health than we assume. On the one hand, lots of walking and no processed food. On the other, infections, starvation, mystery coughs, and zero understanding of how germs work. You get dressed. Slowly. Because one leg doesn't want to bend today, and your shirt sticks to a healing burn you got from brushing against the cookpot last Sunday. Outside, you chop wood. Every swing jostles your spine. You keep swinging. Then to the barn. You milk the goat. She kicks you. Again. Your shoulder screams, but you know better than to scream back. She's bigger than you think, and smarter than she looks. Midday hits. Your lunch is watery gruel and a sprig of old parsley. You chew slowly because your jaw hurts. You remember the time old Bruna tried to fix her aching joints by sleeping with a dead mouse tied to her knee. She still limps. The mouse didn't help. You develop weird rituals, tying cloth around one ankle for balance, rubbing garlic on your elbows to draw out the pain, muttering old rhymes when your knees pop like firewood. Quirky folk belief? In some places, peasants thought if your left leg hurt in the morning, it was a sign you'd stepped on a fairy's path. The cure? Whack yourself with a birch branch and hop backward while spitting 3 times. You tried that once. The branch broke. You fell into a puddle. The fairy was unmoved. You visit the healer. She squints at your hand and says it's blood heat. She gives you a salve that smells like rotten eggs and makes your skin tingle in ways it shouldn't. You apply it anyway, because the only alternative is doing nothing, and doing nothing hurts more. You've never seen a doctor. Closest thing was a friar who said your cough was the devil's exhale and recommended prayer and boiled nettles. You did both. The cough left, eventually. So did the friar. You return to work because no one else will do it. Because the pain is background noise now. Because if you stop moving, you'll rust. Evening comes. You collapse onto the straw. You shift, wince, flip to the other hip, wince again. You try to scratch that one spot on your back, but your shoulder locks halfway there. You give up. Your spouse asks if you're all right. You say, I will be. You're lying, but you're used to that. The priest's voice echoes through the chapel, a slow chant in Latin that rolls over your head like fog over a field. You don't understand a word of it. You nod anyway. Kneel, stand, sit, repeat. You've done this dance since you could walk, and probably before that too. The smoke from the incense stings your eyes. The candles flicker. Your stomach grumbles. You try not to think about stew. You are, after all, in the presence of the Lord, and He's watching, always. You shift on the rough bench and glance at the stained glass windows. They depict angels, martyrs, saints, glorious people with radiant halos and extremely clean feet. You don't relate to any of them. Because you're a sinner. That's the message, loud and clear. You were born stained. Not metaphorically, literally. Your soul, you've been told, was marked by original sin before your first sneeze. Your job is to spend every moment of your short, muddy life scrubbing that stain with prayer, confession, and guilt. Lots of guilt. You once stole a plum. You think about it every week. You also once thought about pushing your brother into a pig trough. You didn't do it, but that thought alone probably earns you 3 years in purgatory. Historians note that peasants internalized spiritual fear deeply because their entire world was shaped by it. Every cough might be divine punishment. Every failed crop, a reminder that God remembers everything. You clutch the rosary your mother made from knotted thread. It's fraying. You worry what that says about your soul. The priest raises a hand. You bow your head. He speaks of hellfire, redemption, and Saint someone who lived on moss for 40 years because his donkey saw a demon. You try to stay awake. You fail. Your head droops. You jolt up. He's staring at you. You're now the example in a cautionary tale. Later, as you exit the chapel, you mumble your penance and step over the neighbor's dog, which is inexplicably sleeping at the altar. Outside, the sun feels wrong, like it shouldn't be shining so brightly when you've just been reminded that even your thoughts are under surveillance. You whisper a quick apology to God for thinking about cheese during the closing hymn. You can't help it. You're hungry. You're always hungry. But guilt is the seasoning on every bite. You pass by the priest's house. It has shutters, real ones, and a garden. You're not envious. That would be sinful. You mutter another apology, just in case. Your spouse meets you by the fence with a bucket of laundry. How was Mass? They ask. Short. You lie. They nod. You both know it wasn't. Later, as you weed the vegetable patch, you think about heaven. You're told it's golden, soft, full of song and food and warmth. You try to imagine it. You always get stuck on the food part. You've never had enough food to understand what full means. The idea that God's watching is both comforting and exhausting. You want to be seen, but not that closely. You want to believe you're doing enough, but deep down, you suspect you're not. Quirky tradition. Some villages believed you could lessen your sins by walking the churchyard counterclockwise at midnight, 7 times, barefoot, while reciting a psalm backward. You once tried it. You forgot the psalm. You stepped on a thorn. You gave up. Tonight, you kneel at your straw mat. You whisper a prayer. Not long, not loud. Just, I'm trying. You hope it's enough. Winter doesn't arrive with fanfare. It creeps in, slow and heavy, like a damp wool cloak you didn't ask for. The cold begins at your toes and works its way up, settling in your joints like a tenant who refuses to pay rent. You wake before dawn, and the frost has already formed its kingdom inside the house. Your breath clouds in the air. The straw beneath you crunches with ice. Someone sneezes, someone else coughs. You roll over and try to pretend you're warm, but the goat has claimed the blanket, and the fire has died down to a miserable glow. Outside, everything is gray. The trees are bare. The ground is hard. Even the chickens look angry. You don't eat breakfast, not because you're fasting, but because you're out of food. You used to have a few roots left, a cabbage, a questionable onion. They're gone now, either eaten or rotted or, in the case of the cabbage, donated to the priest in a moment of ill-advised piety. You trudge to the woodpile. It's nearly empty. The logs are wet and the axe is dull, but you have to try. You swing. The axe bounces. Your shoulder screams. You curse. Then you apologize to the sky, just in case that counts as a sin. You gather what twigs you can and return to the hearth. The stew pot sits where it always does, half full of nothing. The last meal was a broth made from bones boiled so long, even the dog looked unimpressed. Historians often debate how peasants survived winter. The answer? Many didn't. You've seen neighbors vanish under snowdrifts. First their voices, then their footsteps, then their names. You patch the roof with anything. Mud, straw, flattened baskets, prayer. Nothing helps. The wind finds every gap. Your fingers turn red, then purple, then numb. You try to sew your torn mittens. You stab your thumb. You keep sewing. Quirky winter remedy? Some villagers used to sleep with hot stones wrapped in wool, like prehistoric water bottles. You did once. The stone cracked. You woke up with a burn and a blister shaped like St. Cuthbert's nose. You bundle your children in every scrap of cloth you can find. One wears your old tunic as a dress. Another is wrapped in a sack. They look like a traveling troupe of medieval laundry ghosts. Your spouse rations out the last of the flour. It's not much. Enough for flatbread the size of your palm. You each get one. You chew slowly. It tastes like dust and hope. Night comes early. The sky goes black before the soup finishes boiling, which again is mostly water flavored with a very old leek. You light a tallow candle. The flame flickers, weak and nervous. You warm your hands over it, pretending it's a fire. The wind howls outside. Something crashes, probably the shed roof giving up again. You'll check it in spring. If it survives, you try to sleep. The cold laughs. You toss. You turn. Someone sneezes again. Someone else mutters a prayer to St. Nicholas, not for gifts, but for survival. You pull the blanket higher. The goat snorts. The baby stirs. You lie very still and listen to your own heartbeat. Slow, steady, stubborn. Quirky superstition? They say if you can hear snow falling, it means death is walking nearby. Tonight, you swear you hear it. A faint hiss like breath through a cracked window. Or maybe that's just your imagination. Or a rat. You fall asleep eventually, not from comfort, from exhaustion. And when you wake, the fire has gone out again. And it's still winter. The wedding was last week. You didn't cry. You were too cold, too tired, and frankly too distracted by the screaming goat that wandered into the ceremony. The groom caught it. The priest blessed it. It was the most eventful part of the day. You were the one getting married. to a girl from 3 villages over. Her dowry was 2 hens and a patch of overgrown barley. Your bride was polite, quiet, and looked at you like she was mentally calculating your potato yield. Romance, in peasant terms, is an agreement not to fight over which blanket has fewer holes. Your wedding meal was a bowl of lentil stew and half a turnip. The music was one guy with a pipe and another banging 2 wooden spoons. People danced. Someone fell into the fire. It was, by village standards, lovely. And now you're married, which mostly means you share a corner of the hut that smells slightly less like feet. You try not to snore. She tries not to kick you when you do. There is no honeymoon, just back to the fields, back to chores, back to that familiar ache in your spine, and the pleasant surprise of discovering you both dislike the same reeve. Historians debate how much affection was present in peasant marriages. Were they partnerships, contracts, or quiet endurance marathons? The answer is yes, all of the above. You and your spouse develop a rhythm. They mend, you haul. They stir the pot, you chop the firewood. You both glare at the goat when it gets too close to the bedding. Privacy is non-existent. Your siblings sleep beside you. The dog sleeps on your legs. You learn to be quiet, quick, and above all, unfazed. Quirky peasant superstition. If you kiss your spouse too soon after the wedding, the bread will go moldy. You waited 2 days. The bread still went moldy. You talk sometimes, usually at night, whispering beneath the scratchy wool. What would you do? You ask one evening. If we had 10 cows? They laugh. Faint. You both smile, briefly, then cough. Children are expected. So is patience. So is luck. You try to prepare for both. You fix the roof. You stretch the food. You dig the same patch of ground with the same rusted hoe, and she makes stew with the same sad carrots. One night, she cuts her hand on a knife. You wrap it, whisper a prayer. The next day, she wraps yours when you burn your palm on the stove. That's love here. Not roses, not poetry. Just quiet, continued care. You see nobles on the road sometimes. Their wives ride side saddle, draped in cloth that costs more than your hut. They do not make stew. They do not sew. They do not smell like goats. You wonder if they laugh or cough. You wonder if their husbands snore. You and your spouse do not kiss often, but once, when you bring in the firewood without being asked, they take your hand and say, "Thank you." It means more than a dozen sonnets, because in this world, affection is measured in silent acts. And marriage? Marriage is surviving side by side without giving up. Your first child arrives in the middle of the night during a thunderstorm, with the midwife shouting and your spouse screaming, and the dog trying very hard to dig a hole in the floor. You stand in the corner of the hut holding a rag and your breath. And then suddenly, there's a baby, wrinkled, wailing, alive. You've never felt more terrified. The midwife declares it healthy. Your spouse collapses into the straw. The baby squalls, fists clenched like it already knows how hard a life's about to be. You cut the cord with the knife you cleaned in the river. You name the child something simple, something that's easy to carve into wood, should it come to that. Because the truth is, babies don't always last. Half the village's children never make it to age 10. Coughs turn into fevers. Bruises become infections. The church says it's God's will. You suspect it's the rats, but you keep that to yourself. You swaddle your child in an old tunic and place them near the fire. You and your spouse sit back, hollow-eyed, unsure whether to cry or cheer. And so begins the cycle. By the time the child is walking, they're already working, carrying sticks, chasing geese, getting yelled at for putting frogs in the water bucket. You're proud, you're worried, you're tired. Then comes the second child. You're less surprised this time, less terrified, more resigned. Your home now includes 3 small people, 2 adults, 1 goat, and a chicken with abandonment issues. At night, it sounds like a festival, snoring, wheezing, giggling, and the occasional mysterious thump. You pray often, not because you're devout, but because you're scared. You once whispered to the priest, "Why do so many children die?" He said, "Because paradise has a hunger." You didn't ask again. Quirky folk belief? Some peasants believed a baby could be switched by fairies if left alone in the cradle. The solution? Hang iron scissors over the bed and stuff a sock with rosemary. You do both, just in case. One winter, your second child gets sick. Fever, sweat, that hollow look you've seen before. The healer gives you a pouch of dried herbs and says to boil them in milk. You don't have milk. You use water. The fever breaks. Your spouse weeps. The child sleeps. You don't. Not that night. As they grow, your children become arms, legs, labor. They hold tools, weed the field, carry water. You teach them to look down when the reeve walks by, to nod when the priest talks, to smile when they're not scared. But they laugh too. One day, your eldest tells a joke about St. Peter slipping on a fish and knocking over a bishop. You laugh until your ribs hurt. You hadn't laughed like that in weeks. Historians still debate how medieval peasants balanced love and loss, how they dared to care when life was so fragile. But here you are, caring anyway. Because it's not optional. Because they are yours. You sing them to sleep with off-key lullabies. You carve their names into the beam above the hearth. You teach them which mushrooms are safe and which berries aren't. You love them, and every night you pray they'll live to see the spring. Your youngest asks you what the priest just said. You stare blankly for a moment before answering. Something about grace. She squints. But what is grace? You open your mouth, close it, shift on the cold stone bench, and finally say, "It's what happens when God isn't mad at you." She seems satisfied. You are not. Because here's the truth. You don't understand half of what's said at church, probably less. The Mass is in Latin, the prayers are in Latin, and the sermons, while technically in your own tongue, are still full of stories about saints from faraway places, doing things that don't seem even slightly relevant to turnips or sheep. You just nod and mumble along, like everyone else. You can't read. You never learned. No one in your family reads. The only book in the village sits chained to the altar, and the priest is the only one allowed to touch it. He says it's sacred. You believe him. Not because you trust him, but because you don't know how to challenge him. Historians agree, literacy was rare among peasants. Maybe 1 in 100 could read, and even fewer had access to anything worth reading. But that didn't stop the church from using texts as the backbone of authority. You just had to take their word for it. Your daughter's still watching you. So you say, grace is when you do right, even when it's hard. That's a lie. but it's a good one. You remember the last time someone in the village asked the priest to translate a passage from the Bible. The priest said, "The word is not for idle curiosity." The villager was fined. You all learned something that day. You sweep the floor of the chapel as part of your penance. It's quiet, dusty. The stained glass above glows faintly in the morning light, depicting saints who never went hungry and angels who look very well fed. You find a loose piece of parchment near the altar. It has writing on it, tight, looping script you can't decipher. You stare at it for a long time, wondering if it holds a recipe for something better than root soup, or instructions for how to make your back stop hurting, or just a joke passed between monks. You tuck it back under the prayer book and pretend you never saw it. Quirky belief? Some villagers thought that touching sacred text without permission would make your hands burn or your crops fail. You don't believe that, but you still never touch the book. Later, you pass the priest on the road. He nods. You bow. He reminds you that confession is coming. You smile and say, "Of course." You spend the afternoon rehearsing sins, ones that are safe to confess, ones that won't earn you a second week of fasting or another order to clean the outhouse. You never confess the real ones, like the doubts, the questions, the growing pile of thoughts you keep buried beneath chores and fatigue. At dinner, your daughter asks you to tell the story of the boy who saw an angel. You tell it with flourishes. You add fire. You add singing. She claps. She believes you. That night, you lie awake and stare at the rafters. You wonder if you'll ever know what the priest knows, if the words you've heard all your life mean something deeper than guilt and tithes and being small. You whisper a prayer, not to God, but to understanding, just a little, just enough. You wake to a rattle in your chest, not the metaphorical kind, the phlegmy, wheezy, uh-oh kind. You sit up slowly, every joint protesting. Your head feels heavy, your skin clammy, and your teeth ache in their sockets like they've been gossiping behind your back. You're sick, not a little sniffle, not a gentle cough. This is the kind of illness that feels ancient, something that crawled out of the dirt, rode in on a flea, and decided your lungs looked like prime real estate. You wrap yourself in your cloak and shuffle toward the fire. There is no fire. You groan. Your spouse sighs, clicks their tongue, and starts feeding kindling into the hearth. Your eldest fetches water. It's lukewarm and tastes faintly of moss. You drink it anyway. Then the village healer shows up. Her name's Marta. She's somewhere between 60 and eternal. Wears 40 scarves, smells like boiled roots, and says things like, "The sickness is strong in your windpipe." She listens to your chest, pokes your stomach, squints at your tongue, and says, "Your bile is stubborn." You blink. "My what?" She doesn't explain. Instead, she digs into her satchel and pulls out a paste that smells like sadness and pickled feet. She slathers it on your chest and tells you not to laugh, cry, or lie down for an hour. You try not to breathe. Then she wraps your wrists in twine soaked in vinegar and garlic, places a spoonful of something alive under your tongue, and leaves with a handful of carrots as payment. You lie there, vibrating. Your spouse pats your knee. "You'll feel better soon." You nod. You both know that's a guess. Historians document a long list of peasant cures, most of them more superstition than science. For headaches, press a cold pebble to your temple. For fevers, drink sheep's milk mixed with sage and ash. For toothaches, spit in a frog's mouth and whisper a prayer. You once tried that. The frog was very upset. There are no doctors. Not really. Not for people like you. Sometimes a monk with a book of herbal remedies wanders through, offering more prayers than poultices. You don't expect him to stop by unless half the village is coughing in harmony. And then there's the bleeding. The last time you got sick, the priest suggested leeches. You remember lying there with 5 of them sucking on your ankle, feeling like your blood was trying to quit your body. You got better. Eventually, maybe despite the leeches, maybe because of spite. Today, you stay near the hearth. Every cough rattles your ribs. You think about that villager last year who coughed himself to death in a matter of days. They buried him with a pouch of rosemary and a loaf of bread. You wonder if that helped. The children keep their distance, not because they're afraid, because you told them to. You'd rather suffer than see them sniffling too. Quirky bit of village lore. Some say illnesses come from bad dreams that escape your mouth at night. The cure? Sleep with a sprig of lavender between your teeth. You try. It falls out. You choke on it slightly. You give up. By evening, your fever has broken. Maybe. Or it's just the fire finally catching. Your skin burns, but at least you can breathe without wheezing like a dying bellows. You eat soup, thick with barley and garlic. You taste none of it. You fall asleep to the sound of rain on the thatch and a goat chewing something suspicious in the dark. And when you wake, you're still alive, for now. You disappear. Not literally, though that would probably be easier, but figuratively, gradually, like a candle guttering out in a cold room. It begins on a Tuesday, or maybe a Friday. Time's blurry when every day is the same shade of gray. You go out to the field and don't come back for supper. You never miss supper. Not even the soup that was just warm water and hope. Your spouse looks for you. They check the path to the woods, the compost pit, the well. Nothing. Someone says they saw you near the rye field. Someone else swears they passed you walking toward the chapel. You aren't at the chapel. You're lying face down in the mud behind the chicken coop. There's no blood, no drama, just stillness. When they find you, someone mutters, "Another one. Another gone too soon. Another who worked too hard, too long, for too little. Another body for the earth that never gives back quite enough." They carry you home on a cart, lay you out on the same straw you slept on for years. Your hands are folded, your boots still muddy, your fingers still curled, like they were holding on to one last chore. No wailing, no procession, just your family, the priest, and a handful of neighbors who are already worrying about tomorrow's rain. Historians often note how invisible death was for peasants. Records are vague, graves unmarked, names lost. You were born in dirt, and you return to it with little fanfare. The priest offers a brief prayer. He doesn't know your favorite hymn, or that you once carved a spoon shaped like a duck, or that you used to hum while threshing grain. But he says the right words, Latin ones. You are buried before sunset, wrapped in cloth, not a coffin. There wasn't time, or wood, or a reason, really. Just a shallow grave at the edge of the churchyard, near the crooked fence, and that one stubborn weed that always grows too tall. Quirky tradition. Some villagers place coins over the eyes of the dead, not for the ferryman, not exactly, But to keep the soul from wandering before the priest can bless it, you get one coin, a bent one. The other's been lost since last harvest. Your name is said once during the next Mass, softly, briefly, then followed by a list of saints and an announcement about firewood needing splitting. You don't get a statue. You don't get a song. Your spouse goes back to mending. Your children go back to work. Life doesn't stop. Because it can't. There are fences to patch, roofs to mend, porridge to stir. And no one has time to remember every name carved into the fog. It's been a few weeks now, maybe more. Your name doesn't get mentioned anymore. Not in prayers, not in gossip, not even in passing reference to that time you fixed the millstone with a wedge and a prayer. You've faded into the village's soft forgetting. Not because they didn't love you, but because life demands it. There's work to do. There's always work to do. But today, there's laughter. Somewhere near the green, a pig is dancing. Well, not really dancing. It's escaped and is doing its best impression of a demon on ice, with 3 children hanging off its flanks and a 4th trailing behind with a stick and wildly misplaced optimism. The entire village is watching and laughing. Not the deep, belly-roaring feast day kind of laughter. No, this is thin and breathy, surprised laughter, accidental joy, the kind that bubbles up when no one expects it. Even your spouse smiles. Just a little. They sit on the bench outside the hut, needle in hand, mending a sock that's more whole than cloth. They don't laugh much these days, but this pig, this ridiculous mud-smeared squelch-barking pig, it earns a snort. Moments like these are rare, too rare. The priest walks by and gives a look that says, "Laughter is fine, but let's not forget the fear of God." He almost trips over a turnip. No one says anything, but everyone thinks about it. Historians note that peasant life wasn't entirely grim. There were festivals, yes, and songs, and courtship games involving apples and ropes. But the joy was brief, peripheral, heavily taxed, both spiritually and socially. You remember the midsummer feast 2 years ago, how someone juggled potatoes and another tried to teach the pig to sit? You laughed so hard that night your side cramped. You also tore your sleeve and got fined for improper presentation before the altar. Worth it. You once carved a face into a loaf of bread, gave it a name, told the children it was the Crumb King and it would bless anyone who kissed his crust. You forgot the joke. The kids didn't. Your daughter found the crust last week while sweeping. She stared at it for a while, then smiled. There's joy here, yes, but it's fleeting. As soon as it arrives, it's chased off by frost, or fever, or Father Ulrich's sermon on excessive merriment. Laughter, he says, is only holy when it's humble. You're not sure what that means, but you laugh anyway. Tonight, your family shares a bowl of thin stew with actual flavor. A merchant passed through and traded a pouch of herbs for directions and a polite nod. Your spouse used all of it. The stew tastes like something better than usual, like memory, like grace, maybe. Your children giggle over nonsense. The fire flickers. The wind hisses gently against the shutters. But for once, it's not angry. And for just a moment, the heaviness lifts. Not all of it, but enough. Quirky tradition? Some peasants believed if you laughed too much at night, it would invite mischievous spirits who'd hide your boots or sour your milk. You test it anyway. You chuckle, just to see. Nothing sours. Your spouse says, "The boots are still here." You both laugh. a little more. You go to bed with aching ribs instead of an aching soul. And in the dark, you dream of the pig again, spinning, skipping, absolutely thrilled to be alive. It's almost spring. You can feel it, not in the warm sun or blooming flowers, because neither have shown up yet, but in the way the mud has changed. It's hopeful mud now, the kind that sticks to your boots but whispers that maybe, just maybe, it'll dry someday. You rise early, creaking in all your joints. The frost is lighter. The roof didn't drip last night. The hens have begun laying again. The goat hasn't screamed in 3 days. Signs. All signs. You check the field. There are shoots. Real ones. Green. Brave. You smile so hard your face forgets how. Your children run outside barefoot and sink ankle deep in thawed soil. You yell at them because that's your job. They laugh because that's theirs. Your spouse catches you humming. "What's that tune?" they ask. You stop. Don't know. "You do," they say. You shrug. "Maybe I remember it from a wedding." They nod. That's enough. Historians write that spring was a sacred time for peasants, not because of poetry or flower crowns, but because it meant survival. Crops meant food. Food meant less death. Less death meant one more chance to live a little. You repair a fence post. The wood is damp but salvageable, like you. Someone down the lane is baking. The air smells faintly of bread, herbs, and firewood smoke. You inhale, deeply, like it's the first good breath of the year. And for a moment, it feels like enough. There's still work to do. Always. You still owe tithes. The priest still side-eyes you when you cough during Mass. The reeve is still suspicious of your compost pile. But the sun is out. The soil is turning. And the studentite might even have meat. That's a miracle by peasant standards. You sit by the hut, tools laid out, children playing with sticks and shouting about dragons. You watch them and smile. You don't interrupt. Not yet. They still believe dragons exist. They still believe you could fight one. And in this soft, early light, you believe it too. And now, the sun has set. The fields rest. The fire has dimmed to a hush, just embers and memory. The village breathes slowly, gently, under a quilt of night. Inside your hut, the sounds of sleep fill the corners. Murmurs, shifting straw, the soft sigh of someone dreaming about warm bread or summer rain. You lie back, arms folded, bones aching in that oddly satisfying way they do after a long, honest day. Your hands are dirty. Your heart is full. Outside, the wind is low. The trees whisper. The stars blink, not with judgment, but with curiosity. You watch them from the small gap in the thatch and wonder what it's like to be so far above frost and tithes and goats. You close your eyes. Your breath slows. Your thoughts soften. The chores, the coughs, the cracked boots, they blur into the background. Your dreams begin to stir. Flickers of green fields, laughter around a fire, maybe even a smiling pig doing a dance just for you. You are still a peasant, but not tonight. Tonight you are warm, safe, wrapped in layers of straw and linen and quiet love. You've survived another winter. You've laughed in defiance. You've dared to hope. And now, you sleep, because tomorrow will be hard. But not now. Now, the night wraps around you like a lullaby made of soil and starlight. Rest. You've earned it.